Hey, Corey.
Hey, Kev.
Yeah, we are live. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight from the Whiskey Mavens, and those of you watching elsewhere as well. My name is Claire Burton-Lang. I work with Westward Whiskey out of Portland, Oregon, but I'm based in New York City. And tonight, the tasting is going to be led by Westward Whiskey's co-founder and master distiller, Christian Krogstad, joining us from Oregon, Washington?
Yeah, Oregon.
And Christian has a background in brewing. He went to brewing school in Chicago, which we was just talking about with some of you folks back in the early 90s, after having been born in Seattle. And then he returned to the Pacific Northwest, the home of kind of the renaissance of craft, or the originators of craft brewing over on the West Coast. And worked also managing a wine studio, and then started Westward Whiskey. And so I will hand it off to him to tell you the origin story of Westward, American single malt, a new and emerging category. He can also answer any questions you might have about what is American single malt and the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission and the TTB, potentially, maybe, finally, we'll see, making us a category. So with that, I'll hand it off to Christian.
All right, thank you. Yeah, all those things. I'm yours for the next hour or however long we want to go over if we want to. And I love questions. So if you have any questions, either shout them out or put them up on the comments. I even have one already. Oh no. Yeah, as Claire said, I started my journey to this place back in 1991. I'm originally from Seattle, but I had been, home brewing in Seattle throughout the 1980s. Really had a front row seat for the sort of that renaissance of the craft brewing movement, like Claire said, and I really enjoyed it. I was passionate about the flavors, the brands, and especially about the innovation that was coming out of craft beer. I loved the great, classic beer styles that, Belgian Trappist ales or the, London porters or Bavarian Hefeweizens and so forth. And, I still go back to those, but, I loved having new experiences, new flavors. And my final job in brewing was in 2001, 2002. I was managing a brewery in Portland, and the owners, a microbrewery in Portland, and the owners of the place brought in a little still, a little Holstein, 60-gallon pot still to make whiskey because, they had heard that, whiskey was really just distilled beer, and they thought they'd try it out. And so I got to participate in that, helping out with making the washes and then trucking them up the hill and hanging out for distillation and so forth. And through that process, I was kind of like, well, shit, I can do this. And in fact, I thought maybe I can do it better than these guys are doing it. And so a buddy and I quit our jobs, pooled up our money. It was about $65,000, which is not enough to start a whiskey distillery. But we got going with a little distillery, bought a couple stills, made clear spirits to pay the bills. In the first 7 years, we were exclusively making beer on friends breweries and then trucking the wash over to our place to ferment and distill. So we did everything we could to kind of keep our investment down, keep our cash needs down, so that we could really focus on, building the brand and growing it. So we made some clear spirits along the way, Krogstad Akavit, Aviation Gin, which then we sold about 6 years ago to Blake Lively's husband. And the proceeds from that really allowed us to build our new, whiskey distillery, which if you come to Portland, I would love to have you visit us. We're in essentially downtown Portland, 14,000 square foot production distillery with a beautiful brewery that produces our washes for us. But we're producing about we're filling currently about 1,200 casks per year. Is our, to just give you a scale of what we're doing, filling about 1,200 casks per year. If we were a microbrewery, if we were bottling all the beer that all the washes, we would be about the 9th largest brewery in Oregon. So decent size. And then outside of town, about 10 miles outside of town, we have a rick house with about 5,000 barrels in aging out there. So, we're sort of large for a micro distillery or craft distillery, but obviously tiny compared to the big boys. And so that's in a nutshell. That's sort of the trajectory of the company. We about 11 years ago, I bought out my original partner, and then a year after that, brought in got a new partner, and he came in with a group of some investors that he knew, and that helped us kind of start to build the company up, build up some inventory, and that's when I went from being sole owner to being a minority owner now. So I'm a part owner of the company, employee. I am involved in the innovation and new product development, in the facility expansions, things like that, and then communicating our whiskeys and our brands to folks like you.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's questions about size of cooperage and all that. I'd love to get into details, love to get into the weeds. I think we might as well start with the sip, and then we'll talk about it. So starting off, because we only have an hour, and we have 4 things to taste. We have 4 whiskeys to taste. We're going to start with the blue or teal label, the Westward American single malt whiskey. And so that is our flagship. That's our original Westward. This is really what I had in mind 18 years ago when I was starting the distillery, and I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you about it. So there is the 4 whiskeys that you have. There's also a sample of our malted barley, because I really do want to talk about the barley and the beer, and how barley becomes malt and how malt becomes whiskey. And you also have a chocolate bar, which is a delicious woodblock chocolate from Portland. It's made with our malts. It's a delicious chocolate bar. You can have it now, save it for tonight, whatever. But it's really delicious. That looks like the cask strength. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Oh, you're still muted, Joe.
So which one did we want?
Teal.
We'll start with it's a blue. Yes, that one. Perfect. So it is 90 proof, 45% ABV. So it is, American single malt. And what does that mean? It's, it's 100% malted barley from a single distillery, ours, made in America, obviously, Portland, Oregon. And so the definition of American single malt also includes, it kind of diverges from the Scottish definition. It's closer to the U.S. definitions for bourbon. So distilled to less than 160 proof, aged in oak containers, smaller than 700 liters, and bottled at 80 proof or higher. And so it fits in all those. What you're going to really see about this, I'm going to lead us in a little tasting of it, and then we'll come back and talk about how we made it and why it is the way it is. So you're going to get a lot of fruit, vanilla, caramel on the nose. You get this like bright apple, ripe Bartlett pear, or banana on the nose. Very clean nose. On the palate, it's just very I guess the one thing that I like to point out more than anything, it's got this incredible texture, great mouthfeel. It really hits every part of your palate. Very balanced on the palate, very, very balanced on the flavor. Very robust, big flavor, but very drinkable at the same time. And then a nice lingering sweet finish, a little bit spicy. So cheers.
It has brilliant nose. I love the nose in this one.
Thank you.
You didn't say it, but the first thing I smelled was cherry.
Yeah, cherry.
And very lovely cherry.
Yeah.
I get a almost a banana cream. Also in the back of my throat, the flavor, the banana cream dessert you always liked or something.
Yeah.
I get that kind of it.
Yeah, the banana is really strong on that. I really like
Yeah.
it.
Has a nice little bite.
It does have a nice bite.
Nice
For low proof, it's got a decent bite.
Yeah, there's a ton of banana in that. And that's the yeast strain that we use. So that's a great opener to talk about our process, our philosophy. So kind of going back to the beer story, I really, as I mentioned, I really learned from craft brewing that innovation was really important. There's really no way you can compete with Scotland in making a Scotch style whiskey. They're already doing it, So it's more important to be innovative, to bring something new to the discussion, something new to the world of whiskey, and we do that by really focusing on the beer. We make, and when you come visit us, part of every tour, we pour beer off the fermenter to have people enjoy the actual beer that's going to be distilled. And that's rare in distilleries because usually they're sour, they're funky, they're kind of gross. But because we're focusing on the fermentation, we have a nice cool ferment. We fermented about 73 degrees using an ale yeast. We, in fact, use the same yeast strain that Sierra Nevada uses for their pale ale. So thus the banana, the ripe Bartlett pear, some of those fruit esters that are generated during the fermentation, the metabolic activity of the yeast. Also, you get some notes of like some strawberry, you get some rose, jasmine. A lot of people get mint. I don't get it, but so many people talk about mint in here that I have to accept that it's real, but not to my knowledge.
I get a little heat, like a little cinnamon almost.
Yeah.
It's not mint. It's more of a cinnamon, I think.
Cinnamon is like baking spice.
Yeah, it's a baking spice.
Some of that comes from the fermentation. Some of it also comes from the barrel. So we're using all Northwest two-row pale ale malt. So the majority of the two-row beer malt in the U.S. comes from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, a little bit in western Montana, but mostly right around us. And that's part of why this region became such a brewing hotbed. So local barley malt. We crush it. We do a wash rather than a mash. So we run it off just like a beer. So we separate the grain from the liquid. We boil it, which is kind of unusual because we actually that's what breweries do, to sanitize the wort. We don't want any bacteria in there. We really want to just focus on the yeast strain that we've chosen. Then, like I said, fermentation is about a 6-day process at a nice cool temperature. Gives it a long time to really generate those big fruit flavors. And then because we've put so much focus and effort into making a nice, clean, delicious, very pretty beer, we don't have to really clean it up. We're not trying to, in the distillery, we're not trying to clean it up. We're just trying to concentrate it. So we have very little reflux in our stills. Our beer still, our stripping still, 3,100 gallons, which is a fairly large pot. The head on that is only about the swan's neck is only about 8 feet high, and it's quite small. So if you go on our website, you can see some pictures of equipment and so forth. So we have very little reflux, and consequently, as we heat up that beer, we get a much larger cross section, much more congeners coming through, a lot of the heavier congeners. The lin arm slopes sharply down from the swan's neck to the condenser. So anything that makes it up that 8-foot head is going to end up in the low wines. So the first pot still run takes it from about 8.25% alcohol beer up to about a 35% alcohol low wines. And then the next day we run it through our spirit still, which has an even shorter head on it. The swan's neck on that is about 3 feet.
Oh, wow.
It's a 700-gallon spirit still. Run it nice and slow. It's about a 12-hour run, so we get a really good separation. So that takes it up from 35% alcohol low wines to say a 72% alcohol new make. Very little. Again, because we've been very careful with the fermentation, we have very, very small heads cuts. A couple gallons is all we get. Very little, ethyl acetate and acetone and so forth. So it's we're really kind of rewarded by, our reward for our care with the beer is that we get this very rich, textural, robust new make. I sort of jokingly refer to it as barley eau de vie because it's very fruity. It's almost like an eau de vie. But it's so rich, so robust, so flavorful that it actually can stand up to a new, virgin American white oak barrel. So that's what we do. We age then in typically two char, so a light char, 53-gallon or 200-liter American white oak casks. Entry proof is right around 125 proof. And that's the process. So it's really like we've taken a delicious beer, sort of similar to like a Fin de Monde, if you know that product, or Duvel, or say a Sierra Nevada without the hops, and we've converted it into this incredibly fruity, textural, luscious new make, and so that cinnamon and baking spice is mostly coming from that new barrel because the American white oak tends to have a lot of that baking spice. I'm going to read a couple questions here, unless they've been shouted out already. Ty's type, cooperage, most of it is, what we're tasting here is from Gibbs brother, or no, I'm sorry, Kelvin Cooperage in Louisville. They do a fantastic job, kind of an interesting twist on things. They have their own, they march to their own drummer, but fantastic barrels. They're all 200. Everything we do is in 200 liter, 53-gallon for at least the beginning. Some goes into 220 gallon, but for the most part, we're in 200 or 220 liters. Sorry. On issues, the average time in cooperage is, so everything's over 4 years, obviously, because we don't put an age statement on anything, because we really don't want to focus on the age. We're trying to produce this very fruity, very luscious, expressive whiskeys. So they're typically going to be younger. What you have in your glass is typically right around 5 years. Some of these go up 5.5, 6 years. But typically what we're doing, the way we make whiskey, it wants to be younger because it really expresses that fruit. And the longer it stays in the barrel, the more it loses the fruit, and the more you get those, beautiful, earthy leather, so forth. But you invariably lose the fruit with time. And we put a lot of effort into bringing that fruit to the table, and we don't want to lose it.
I found that typically American single malts, you're getting 5-6 years. That's pretty old.
Yeah. I mean, typically, if you've been really careful with the ferment and haven't produced a lot of those solvent qualities, then it's losing that sort of immaturity, that sort of OD quality, typically around 3 to 3.5 years, depending on the aging conditions and so forth. But I've had some beautiful whiskeys at even 2 years.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm saying you're saying 5 to 6 years. To me, that's elderly.
Oh well. I think that for us, that's sort of the sweet spot for where we've got the most, we still have that big, luscious, ripe fruit, but we're getting some of the esterification products, some of those more depth of character from a little bit extra. So I think this would be a great time to taste that malted barley, because that's the base ingredient of our beer, which we then turn into whiskey. So that is from Great Western Malting, which is just across the river from us in Vancouver, Washington. If you taste that malted barley, you'll see it's got this like great nutty biscuit. Obviously, grape nuts is made from this very thing. And you'll get that sort of grape nuts quality to it. And hopefully, you're picking that out in the whiskey too.
Wow, now that you say that, I'm like, man, that is.
Yeah, it really sort of, everything we're doing is an attempt to kind of preserve the flavors that we generate along the way. So we want that barley malt to come through in the finished product. We want the fermentation esters and various congeners from fermentation to come through as well. And so that's thus the short heads on the stills and the very little reflux. The more reflux you have, the closer you are to vodka.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a purpose for reflux, and you've got to have some, and we have enough copper in the process to get rid of the sulfur, so you don't really notice any sulfur in here.
You don't notice any at all. I don't. And some of them you pick it up fairly easy, and this you don't. So
Yeah. But this is this. People often ask me what's my favorite of our lineup, and we have a whiskey club where we're constantly we do a lot of innovation. We do a lot of different crazy this and that. If you look at our website, you can see some of the batches that we've done for that. Usually, for us, a batch yields 5 barrels of whiskey, 1,500 bottles. And there's been some really interesting stuff, some whiskeys that I really love, but this Westward American Single Malt, our flagship, is really, this is what I had in mind. This is my for me, this is my perfect whiskey, because it's got a lot of flavor, but it's balanced. It's complex enough that you can analyze the hell out of it if you want. You can spend all day.
It goes on and on and on.
Picking it apart, or you can just drink it and enjoy it. And that's what I like about it. What I've always tried to do with brewing, with wine, with cocktails, with food, is I always want to make something where, when you're done with it, you want another. You don't go, oh, well, that was interesting. What else do you have? Like, wow, that was really powerful.
Cocktail is only as good as the stuff that goes in it.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Someone had a question on the strain of barley. Who was that? I think I saw. Yeah.
I did. I just wondering, because I know when making scotch, they often use multiple different strains in the mash bill, and I know it's all barley, but
yep. So this is what we're drinking in this glass is mostly just two strains. It's one is called Metcalf and the other is called Copeland. And those are two varieties that have been bred for the local conditions. They're two-row spring. They're both spring two-row. There might be, I'd have to look up this blending and bottling, but there might be a little bit of a new variety that's coming into the mix too, which is called Full Pint. And Full Pint is a dwarf barley that's more common in Canada, but it's really coming on, and it's a fantastic. You get this great sort of toffee kind of quality out of the full pint, and then another variety that's just, in fact, I just grew some last summer and malted it myself, or hired someone to malt it, but I farmed it, and going to be farming a little more this year, is a variety that was just bred by Pat Hayes, who's one of the top barley breeders in the world. He's right here at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, and he's got this new variety called Oregon Promise, which is a cross between full pint and Golden Promise. So you get that great grassiness of the Golden Promise, along with the toffee notes of the full pint, and it is then a dwarf variety, which is less susceptible to windrows, lodging, it's called, when the stalks get knocked down. So it's I think you're going to be hearing a lot about Oregon Promise in the coming years, especially for single malt whiskey. That answer the question about varieties, barley strains. Let's call them strains.
Okay. What's the rate of evaporation in your part of the country?
So it's very gentle. The angels are good to us out here. We have so we're between two mountain ranges. So the Cascade Mountains are to our east, and they're fairly high. They get up to 14,000 feet. It's a big subduction zone, volcanic mountain range. And then to our west is an up tilt, whatever you call that, the Coast Range, which are up to about 3,500 to 4,500 feet. So they're lower. So we're definitely a sort of a marine environment, but we're not as wet as the coast itself. So the Coast Range stops a lot of the
You're
rain.
more semi-arid out there, aren't you?
Pardon?
Cooler semi-arid temperature.
So we're in the summer, we're sort of warm to hot and arid. So it's when it's hot here, we have very low humidity. So in the summer, we lose water faster than we lose alcohol. So the proof goes up a little bit. In the winter, it's never really that cold. It gets close to zero. It might drop below zero, but in the rick house, it'll stay because you got that huge heat sink. It doesn't drop below zero usually. And so it's very humid. It's very, damp air. And so we lose a little bit of alcohol in the winter. The net effect is it nets out to gain a little bit of alcohol over the course of, say, 5 years. Entry proof will be 125 proof, and cask strength in the cask after 5 years will typically be 127, 128 proof, something like that.
Oh, wow. So you get very little.
Very little. And then our evaporation, over 5 years, the first year we lose, 3% to the staves, just soaking the staves. And then it's about 1.5 to 2% a year after that. So total over 5 years is, maybe 13 to 15%.
So do you plan to, is there any plan of age stated sometimes in the future, or you plan to remain NAS?
That's a great question. That's a question for marketing.
And then single barrels that are so popular.
Yeah, we
kill everything. Don't do it.
We do some single barrels for various folks.
Okay, except if you want to send one to me, I'm
oh yeah. Okay. We'll work. We'll just stay on the
In
call
fact,
and we'll talk about it.
In fact, that's what got me into Westward, the single barrels.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's some really interesting stuff. So at this point, we don't have a plan for a non-age state or for an age statement, but that could change. We would, if we were aging something, if we were doing a 10 or 12 year, we would probably put an age statement on it, but we would also be distilling it differently. We would be using different barrels, and we would be making different cuts and so forth. So you're going to treat it differently in the brewery and in the distillery if your intention is to age it longer.
Any plans of mixing the barley strains between 2-row and 6-row? Because 6-row gives you more viscosity and body.
So we've looked at some 6-row, and in fact, some of the new 6-row varieties are pretty interesting. Typically, they are more astringent, whereas the 2-row is going to give you softer, fruitier flavors. But we really don't grow much 6-row around here. We grow 2-row. 6-row is more grown in Montana, the Dakotas, Manitoba, places like that.
Where do you distribute?
We distribute in the U.S. in sort of some of the West Coast, then some of the larger states, Illinois, Texas, New York, Florida. I think that is on our website, but we really distribute throughout the country because we ship. So you can get us through Flaviar or Caskers or Reserve Bar, places like that. Again, that sort of stuff is on our website. We also distribute. We export to Australia, Singapore, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, and Western Europe. So we're getting out there. We're selling now in Scotland, which I'm thrilled about. I'm going Coles to Newcastle. Scots love whiskey. Hopefully they won't send us any bombs or anything. But yeah, I say it all the time. I love Scottish single malts. I drink the hell out of Oban and some others. If you want Scotch, buy Scotch. We're not trying to make Scotch. We're trying to make American single malt, which is really defined by this more fruit forward, really the focus on the beer and on the flavors of the fermentation and such. So the next one is really fun. That's the gray label, the stout cask finish. So that should be fairly well labeled. So like I said before, and I've said repeatedly, we're a bunch of former brewers. We all have friends who own or run breweries. And so when we're done with our barrels, when we dump them to bottle the Westward original American single malt, we give those empty barrels still wet with whiskey because we don't steam them or anything. We give those barrels to our brewery friends to make their imperial stouts. And they typically age an imperial stout in one of those barrels for 9 to 18 months. And then they give those barrels back, and we finish mature Westward in those barrels for a further year. And it's really interesting. It's fascinating what happens. So what you're going to notice, it's a lot more perfumey nose. It doesn't have the big fruit nose. It's more perfumey. On the palate, you still get that creamy richness, big mouthfeel, but instead of it being like that big fruit bomb, very luscious, it's more restrained. It's a little more elegant, more layered flavors, and it finishes with a really nice chocolate coffee lingering aftertaste. And something, I talk a lot about, the science of distilling and brewing and the art of science and distilling, but this is almost like the magic of distilling. Something happens in those. What's that?
I'm sorry about that. It's a toffee bomb.
Toffee bomb. So something happens in that, year of aging imperial stout in these barrels that changes the chemistry of the wood. I don't know the structure. I don't know what happens, but the effect is that it takes this very luscious, sweet, fruity, original American single malt and turns it into this more, like I said, more dry, structured, I would say maybe a little more elegant single malt. But it's from the same grain, same yeast, same fermentation, same initial barrels, same distillation. It's just someone's borrowed our barrels for a year and given them back.
I think it even gives it a little bit more of an oaky flavor too. You get a little oak on it, the dryness from the oak.
I'm picking up a lot of citrus.
Yeah,
And I'm not a beer drinker, so I don't know what to identify in a stout.
Well, on the stout, really the only there's no beer left in those casks.
Right.
Sure.
But they have sort of permeated the wood a little bit. So you get a little bit of that chocolate and coffee at the finish. And that's from the stout for sure. And also, I mean, that's intrinsic to Westward whiskey. I mean, you get a little bit of that in the original as well.
Yeah.
But to me, the citrus really stands out on the palate and on the finish.
Yeah, citrus. For me, it's more expressing itself as like a nectarine rather than citrus. But yeah, I get what you're talking about. So that's, these are all four of these that we're tasting today are in our permanent. They're in our permanent collection. There we go. It's like a gallery.
This one is, I think I like this one even better. It's a little less fruity. It's not quite so sweet, but it's got a lot of caramel. It's got a little bit of that baking spice that you get, especially as you let it linger for a while. It's got a nice creaminess to it still, even though it's been in the barrel for another year. Usually it's more viscous than, creamy, but it's still a little creamy, and it's nice. I like it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, really nice.
What was the proof on this? I must have missed it.
It's 46, 92 proof.
92?
Yeah, and it's so this is 90 proof. This is 92, and the reason for that is we don't chill filter. We don't get any sort of clouding at 90 with this, but at 90, originally we were bottling this at 90 and we were getting flocks in it, and we had to just bump the proof up just a little bit to avoid that.
It's good.
Thank you.
And the stout finish is your ongoing expression, right?
Yeah, all four of the samples that you have today are ongoing expressions. This, and they're also in order of release date. So the original was our first release. The stout was our second addition to our full-time lineup, and then the Pinot Noir cask was the third. So kind of going back to I'm banging this drum about innovation and doing things our own way and being American single malt. A lot of people ask me if we're going to make a peated whiskey. It's like, well, probably not. I wouldn't rule it out. We might make a batch just because it'd be fun to do one batch of it. But someone else is already doing that. The Scots are, and we've got to leave them something. So we don't want to take that away from them too. So we're certainly not going to make a business of peated whiskey. We are getting again, we're in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. If any of you have ever had some of the great smoked salmon from here, it's smoked over alderwood.
Oh, yeah.
And alderwood is a more sweet, aromatic, a little bit more grassy than peat, whereas peat is more medicinal, more a little more shocking, I guess I would say. So we're getting a truckload of 48,000 pounds of the alder smoked malt in a couple weeks, and so that'll produce 40 barrels or so of alder smoked whiskey. So we'll see. That's just sort of an example of our innovation, our devil may care attitude about making whiskey. So far, all of our innovation, all but one of our batches has turned out really well. So with innovation, you have to be prepared to dump it or not sell it or whatever. So far, I guess knock on wood, we've gotten really lucky, and our innovation experiments have done very well. And in fact, these, the stout cask and the Pinot cask are both, were at one point an innovation batch. So moving on then to is everyone ready to go to the Pinot Noir cask? So the other thing,
I'm been madly in. I don't know if you can see my face. I've been madly in love with the nose on this.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
another thing people ask a lot is, are we ever going to use sherry barrels or port, sherry butts or port pipes for finishing our whiskey? And it's like, again, someone else is already doing that. I love the Scottish malts finished in sherry casks, but in Oregon we have this fantastic Pinot Noir industry. We make some of the best Pinot Noir in the world. Right here, right around me where I'm sitting right now, but within an hour of the distillery. I have a lot of friends who make wine, and so we thought we'd try it. We tried it, and it worked really well. And it's very different. It's not a Me Too thing. It doesn't taste like a sherry cask finish. It is its own thing. So in Oregon, they use predominantly French oak, toasted French oak barrels. They'll use them for 6 years and then discard them. They'll consider them sort of neutral or used up at 6 years. That's when we get them. We rinse them out so that we don't it doesn't turn it purple. But there's still enough of the sort of grape material impregnated into the wood that it really lends it this great it's almost like a Christmas cake or fruit cake sort of quality. You get a lot of raisin, prune, dried dates, a lot of that candied citron, and on the nose, it's a very butterscotch, caramel nose. On the palate, it really tastes sweet, creamy and sweet. But it's not, if you check in with your palate, if you sort of close off your retronasal and really just check in with your palate, you'll see that there's no sugar really. It's just that all those esters, all those fruit elements trick your palate, trick your brain. Your brain's telling you it's sweet, even though it's not.
By far, this is my favorite one so far.
Oh,
it's very interesting. It's just different, and I like it.
This is.
I've never tasted anything like this. It's good.
This brings out the broadest smile on me.
It kind of feels different than it tastes. It's the only way I can describe it.
It does not taste like it smells. When you smell it, you're like, and then you taste it's absolutely opposite. You're like, that's odd, but it's good.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. This is the only one that really, there's tannins in all of these because there's oak tannins, but again, this is from the original Westward flagship base. That's then we finish it in the Pinot barrels for about a year and a half.
It's got a nice oily texture to it.
Yeah, it's very viscous, very rich. But so whereas the original has a fairly simple tannin profile, you get a lot more. You get sort of the creaminess of the American oak. You get the velvetyness of the French oak.
I like the French oak too. I have a bourbon up there. It's French oak, and it's fantastic.
It's just nice to have those different tannin elements, and you also get the tannin element from the grape skins. The Pinot Noir skins has a different kind of tannin, and so, but it's not. It has a slight grip to it, but it's not like astringent. It's not like drying out your mouth.
Right.
It's really
Kudos.
nice.
This is
really nice.
This is excellent.
Really nice.
By far my favorite. And I was gonna say I am actually a sommelier by trade, years and years ago. But I was gonna say it has a unique viscosity and weight to it that's very, very different from the other two, and I was very drawn to it.
It's almost dangerously drinkable.
Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Oh, we haven't gotten
Like you can
past
drink way too much before you know it.
Yeah, this is great. This one. This is really.
Well, thank you. And we've done we've experimented with a couple other, since we do have such a vibrant wine industry around here. A friend of mine gave us a punchin, which is a 120 gallon, 500 liter cask that he made his Tempranillo in. He grows Tempranillo out in the Columbia Gorge, where it's hot, dry, sort of like that Rioja, central Spain kind of climate. And he had these puncheons, which are incredibly expensive casks, but one of the heads on one of them warped, and he had no longer had confidence that it would hold wine. So he gave it to us, and we drilled a new bunghole in the head so that we just stood it up on a pallet, and we gave it a little rinse, and we aged again. We finished some Westward in that, and it was beautiful. It was very different than the Pinot cask. It was more like dried cherry, dried red currant, kind of intensity, almost like Amarena cherry.
I would bet there'd be a lot of spice to it as well.
Yeah, but more
like baking spice.
Yeah, baking spice, and sort of like, and the thing that really though jumped out was that like Amarena cherry, almond, dried cherry kind of qualities. It was fantastic. So
unique. Cool.
All right, we'll move on to the fourth, final, and then we can come back and taste any of these, talk about them. But cask strength is the fourth one. It is 125 proof, and what I love to point out about this is how drinkable it is at 125 proof. Obviously, you can add water, you can put an ice cube in it, whatever you want. But it's got that sort of signature fruit note, but at a higher proof, the alcohol kind of holds on to those esters a little bit. And so you're not getting as much fruit, is not as sort of, robust as the original.
And is that the proof at which it goes into the barrel? 125?
It's the proof at which it goes into the barrel, yeah. And so because we're printing labels, we don't want to have to handwrite every label. So we take everything down from 126, 127 proof down to 125.
Oh, okay.
Thus, cask strength, it's actually just a tiny bit below cask strength, but 125 proof. So respectable. It's a respectable whiskey.
It drinks way below its proof. It doesn't drink like 125.
Yeah.
It has heat, but it's really.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly creamy for 125 proof.
Yeah. Right.
It just completely coats the inside of your mouth. It's not hot like 125 proof would be generally, a lot of them anyway. And this one is also very dangerously drinkable.
Yeah. Isn't it? Yeah. It makes a fantastic sour.
Yeah, it does.
I was gonna say, you say sour, but this one of all of them to me has the most like lemon right up front. And
I can smell it. You can smell it right. I mean, it's right on the nose too. Peel.
It's almost like a lemon curd as you move into like the mid palate. It's cool.
I love lemon curd.
I do too. No, actually, it's that oily. It's that oily lemon peel smell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like lemon oil. Yeah.
I mean, I should thank the COVID for me going out of my comfort zone and experimenting different whiskeys in the last couple of years, and I'm really thankful. I mean, I know it's not the right thing to say, but I would not have explored a lot of these whiskeys had it not been for COVID.
Yeah, there's a whole world out there there's a whole world of whiskey. So
I probably want to try these at all if I want to join this site. I seriously wouldn't have.
I've already subscribed to your
because I drink a lot of scotch and I like scotch, and then I've kind of converted over to bourbon because scotch got so ridiculously expensive. And then, this is out now and I'm like, wow, this is, and bourbon's getting ridiculous. I mean, and now you can find something that's just as good, if not better.
It's pretty interesting. The American single malt movement, really didn't. I've done a little bit of research on it because I'm involved in. I'm on the board of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, and
good.
I was one of the founders. That on a snowy day in February back in 2016, there was like 10 of us met up at the Binny's in Lincoln Park. And that's where we it was like the Star Chamber. That's where we laid down the rules for American single malt.
Wow.
So that was in 2016. That was exactly 20 years since the launch of the very first American single malt. That was just 20 years. So that was, 26 years ago was when the very first, and that was also here in Portland. It was the McCarthy's from Clear Creek Distillery. They brewed and fermented it, distilled it in 1993, and then they released it at 3 years old in 96. And then later that year, the second one started working. Lance Winters at St. George started working on a single malt, and a couple others in California. Somebody down Peregrine Rock down in like San Bernardino or somewhere like that. Covina started working on single malt. A couple others. When we started in 2004, I think there were maybe 8 or 9 distilleries in the U.S. making single malt whiskey. Most of us were from a brewing background because that's kind of a natural progression. So from 2004, when there were 8 or 9 of us to today, I mean, there are over 100 members of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, and there's closer to 200 distilleries in the country making at least some quantity of single malts. Most of them aren't as big as us, but some of them are. There's a handful that are, sort of in our size class, like Westland up in Seattle, Virginia Distilling in Virginia, couple others.
Copperworks is how big
Copperworks in Seattle. They're not quite. They're about maybe 1/5 our size.
Then there's St. George in Southern California.
Yeah, St. George is in Alameda in the Bay Area, Oakland. So yeah, there's like I said, now there's 200.
We have a couple here in Chicago, and they're really, one is Thornton Distillery, which is they're doing this dead drop whiskey, really good stuff, and then there's the Chicago Distilling Company. They're doing really good too.
Cool. Yeah, it's really exciting to see what's coming down the pike, and some of the innovation that's happening. And that's the great thing. That's what happened with craft beer and craft brewing in this country. Maybe you don't like everything that's made, but at least it's different, and it's pushing the envelope a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I've signed up for your program, wherein every other month you have new expert. I'd like to be part of that journey.
Yeah, it's a fun, and I think you're going to see more and more. The two roles of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission are to why not Tennessee? Tennessee is a franchise state.
I'm telling you can't get nothing here.
Yeah, because once you sell to a distributor, they own you.
Exactly. That's true.
You can't leave them without buying them off.
Right.
So a lot of brands stay out of the control states: Tennessee, Georgia,
Ohio.
Well, I see you're in Georgia though.
Well,
and that's
are we in Georgia? Oh my God.
We can ship to those states. We are not
okay. Oh, those are
distributed. Yeah.
hey, you can ship to my state, just don't tell them.
Yeah.
Oh, did I say that out loud on live?
It's easier to do that
I
with
didn't
the
hear
kits.
anything.
It's easier to do that with the kits than it is with full-size bottles.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, just the innovation that's happening is really exciting, and I think you're going to see all kinds of new flavors, new expressions, and then we're kind of, we also, we sat down and helped create the rules and helped, sort of promulgate them, but at the same time, we're like, well, we don't want to just be limited to using single malted barley. We also want to play around with malted rye, malted wheat, and we do. We just don't call them single malt. We call them two malts. So those are some of the things that you're going to see in that club, those club releases. There's all sorts of fun. We get a little wild.
So you have a club that you can sign up. Do you ship to Tennessee for the club?
No. Looks like it's probably a felony.
A felony?
It's my guess. I mean,
might have to move back to Colorado.
Okay, here's my question for you. Do you think they're really going to come all the way from Tennessee to Oregon to arrest you?
They could put out a bench warrant, and if I ever go to Tennessee,
Like,
I don't know.
You should just get a P.O. box in your closest neighboring state.
Yeah.
There you go.
Alabama.
I may or may not have done that in the past.
I like that.
How far are you from Alabama?
I'm like right next door.
Yeah, there you go. Get a
I mean,
P.O.
I'm like
box.
right on the river, just about.
There you go.
No,
P.O.
it's-
box, Alabama.
Steve, I have your back. Don't worry. Next time I'm driving by Tennessee, I'll drop your bottle off.
I will make it worth your visit.
No, because I drive by your, I think twice or thrice a year on my way to my studio in Atlanta. So yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, Christian, are you interested in our order?
Yes. Oh yeah. They're all number one, right?
Well, that's not possible, but they're all excellent. I will
Yeah.
say that.
this is
I was completely in love with the Pinot.
Pinot,
So,
yeah.
I mean, if that's the one that's quote unquote polarizing, consider me into that camp. But as I
Yeah.
started off telling you, I love different.
Mhm.
I'd go cask strength next. I'd go the flagship next. And the last I would be stout. But I want to be perfectly clear. The stout's delicious. It's just out of the four, it's 4.
Sometimes
And so I like
sometimes I feel me and Jeff are separated at birth because exactly the same order.
this is a great collection. This is a great
Yeah.
collection.
It really is. You should be proud of this because this is really excellent stuff.
Well, thank you. We're all, everyone at Westward is really proud of it. It's a huge, I sort of, I do refer to it as like a distilling commune because everyone pitches in, everyone, my philosophy from day one was always to hire people who are better than I am so that eventually I can just sit on a sailboat and phone it in.
Exactly.
What my philosophy is, I'm happy my dollars are moving from one category of American whiskey to another category, and it's staying within the basket of American whiskeys. It's not. I'm not against globalization. I'm an immigrant. I cannot. But I like the fact that it's moving from bourbons to another category of America, and it's still going to people here. So I love the fact of I love buying American single malts only because it's better than buying Scotch. I'm all honest.
I love Scotch.
I should say it makes me feel better than buying Scotch.
It's just different. It's what it is. Because I like a good peated Scotch. I like a good Islay, but this is just it's completely different. And it depending on your mood and the day. I would pick this up in a second, buy it and drink it. I like it.
Oh yeah,
I would say that this is definitely different from any other single malt, American single malt that I've had.
Yes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, if you're ever in Portland, maybe it's worth taking a trip out. There's quite a few distilleries here, a lot of breweries, a fantastic wine community, great restaurants. It's definitely, if you like to eat and drink, Portland's a great place to come. And then come to our tasting room, come to the distillery.
I'm about 50 pounds overweight.
Oh,
because I like to eat and drink.
No, we should go to Multnomah Library. I love that's one of my favorite whiskey. I don't know what you want to call it. Bars in the whole of US.
Temple.
Yeah,
it's a temple of whiskey.
Temple of whiskey.
Temple of whiskey.
Multnomah.
I like it.
I think they have the most extensive collection of whiskey outside of. The only other place I've seen that range is in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has some really good whiskey libraries. And then Multnomah is like, it's a Zen place where I totally get Zen out there. Yeah.
You can spend a lot of time.
I like the part of world where you set your distillery and really nice. I love that. Pacific Northwest has been one of my favorite geographies in America. I mean, it's
I've been there since the 90s. I need to go back.
Yeah.
I think the last time I was there was like 94 or 95, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot happening here, and pop up to Seattle, and like you were saying, Copperworks is fantastic.
Do you have any pairing suggestions for all the whiskeys that we had today?
Chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate.
Okay.
You should try the chocolate. Did you try the chocolate?
Oh.
Yeah,
Jeff,
I hate to say it didn't last too long after I got it. I ate it.
Hey, Christian.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question that's not necessarily about the whiskey, more about you and your drive to do what you're doing?
Sure.
Anyone who makes something is inspired by somebody else who saw them make something, who made something else. Who are you drinking when you're not drinking Westward?
Let's see. Obviously I experiment a lot. I do drink Scottish single malts. I love a lot of the Japanese, but what I'm probably a couple of the ones that I really gravitate towards here in the U.S. are the Copper Works up in Seattle. The Notch from Nantucket.
Nantucket,
Nantucket. The Baller from.
That's great.
St. George. Oh, I love it. I love the bottle art.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So those are all. I love whiskeys where you can sort of put your finger on something and say, oh, that's what that one has, or that's interesting about that, or that are distinct. Another one that's I've been really enjoying recently in the Southwest, a lot of quite a few distilleries.
Oh yeah, Santa Fe
have been using mesquite. So Santa Fe in particular, that Colkeegan. I'm loving the Colkeegan mesquite smoked single malt. When he first came out with that, it was way over the top. And this happened in beer too. When the breweries started up, they were, you put out your first batch and you get feedback, and then hopefully if it needs correction, you correct it. And his first batch was way too smoky, and then he reeled it in, and now it's one of the best American single malts out there, the Colkeegan.
One distillery on my radar is Cedar Ridge in Iowa.
Oh yeah.
They're good.
Another one is out in Colorado, Boulder Spirits.
Yeah. It's interesting how really the industry started up 20 years ago or so, and how far it's come in such a short time.
Have you tinkered around with, because this is where rye and bourbon, they're starting to tinker around with it, pimento wood, allspice?
We haven't. we've used different oaks, but we haven't used allspice wood. We have hazelnut trees out here as a big industry. We haven't really.
That would be great.
Yeah. There's a lot of future. There's a lot to look forward to.
Well, and that's the cool thing is you can experiment with this stuff and go,
absolutely.
Yeah, I thought that was good, but it's not.
Yeah.
But it happened to me with I don't know, it's Corsair or Crosshair from Tennessee. They had this one
Corsair, yeah.
amazing, and then I tried the others. They were a big letdown for me. So
yeah, but going back to what Claire had mentioned earlier about it possibly becoming a category. Once it officially becomes a category, that also changes how it's administered, ruled, and how much experimentation you can do within said category.
Well,
so there's upsides to it, right?
True, but bear in mind that when we created and the TTB has said that they're going to use our language for the category. It really is it's got some guardrails, but they're pretty wide.
Okay.
We really wanted to, just distill to less than 160 proof, no problem. Malted barley, one distillery in America.
Is there a website for that?
Yep.
Actually, can you put it up in the chat?
I'll pop it in the chat right now.
Yeah.
It's because I'd love to know what you guys are looking to be as a category.
Yep, it's in there. There's that information's in there. All the names of all the members are in there. We had over 200 members until we started charging dues, and then it dropped to about 100.
Okay, yeah. Well, because I was going to say, is there going to be any? Because just like any category, you create the category. And anybody can do it if they're in the category. Is there going to be any formalization of how this is checked, tested, and met out, if you will?
So it's going to be just that, the TTB sets down the rules, and then, it's up to the industry members to stay in compliance. You can't, and if anyone is concerned about a distillery not being in compliance, they can, bring it up with a TTB.
Yeah.
But just like with bourbon, chances are if it says bourbon, it complies with all the rules. You could make something with, and call it bourbon. It has no corn in it through careful, compounding or whatever. But eventually people are going to find out. They're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I'll jump down those roads. That's not a problem. Is there any plans, and maybe this is out of your venue, so what happens if it's not an American single malt? Is it going to be an American malt? Is it going to be an American blended malt?
So good question. So all of those things right now under the TTB rules, for us, calling it single malt whiskey there's no legal definition yet. So that's what's referred to at the TTB as a fanciful name. So really, this is just whiskey. All it is whiskey. So it's not, but it conforms to the rules for the single malt. Yeah, you can call, as long as it's whiskey, you can explain what it is and say, well, it's like we do with our two malts. It's a blend of malted barley and malted rye. So it's not single malt. We call it two malts. And it's just a little bit more, a little bit of education that you have to do.
Sure.
But some people want those different things. And I like to use the example of the Chiantis. Chianti wines for, time immemorial had to be made with 4 different grape varieties. 2 of them were white varieties. And starting in the 60s, 70s, some of these sort of young Turks came along and was like, no, I don't want to put Trebbiano in my Chianti. I want to just use Sangiovese. And the government said, well, you can't call it Chianti then. And they said, fine, screw you. We're going to just call it red table wine. We're going to declassify it. And then those became the most interesting wines out of Tuscany, and people started calling them Super Tuscans, which was a kind of a cooler, catchier name than DOCG Chianti anyway. And so then the sort of the conforming Chianti producers petitioned the government to allow them to change the rules so that they could make a Chianti with just Sangiovese. So, you know, I think it was for the 97 vintage was the first year that, then you could just be 100% Sangiovese. And so, you know, the governments sometimes move slowly. Maybe that's a good thing. You know, maybe they shouldn't just be jumping every time some fad comes along. But you know, there is definitely a partnership between the industry and the regulators in, you know, we do some self-regulation. We work with our regulators to help, you know, create rules and standards that help the consumer understand what they're getting, that help add to clarity and help avoid confusion. And so that's in our best interest, that's in the government's best interest, and it helps kind of foil some of those, you know, shysters who want to put, you know, ox blood and
right. They'll always be there, though.
yeah, sure.
So
sure,
would 100% malted rye be considered American single malt?
No, because it's got to be 100% malted barley. So you could call that a malted rye whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
Single malted rye whiskey.
Or single malted rye, okay.
But there wouldn't be any definition for that.
It would just be an American whiskey.
It'd just be whiskey.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as, American whiskey is whiskey made in America. So you can't say that if it's not made in America, just like Tennessee whiskey has to be made in Tennessee.
Now this is fascinating because when I do my reviews, I am big into education.
Yeah.
And I would rather talk about the distillery or the category or the history before, you know, the tasting notes for me are ancillary.
And that's, I think one of the most exciting things about the American single malt whiskey movement, let's call it, is how pervasive this attitude of transparency and, you know, full disclosure are. You know, like in a lot of these sort of bigger incumbent distilleries in bourbon, in Scotland and so forth, they try to keep a veil of secrecy on things, and which is kind of BS anyway. You can find out what yeast strains they use. You can find out anything from some, you know, disgruntled employee, or at the very least, if not through reverse engineering. So it's all like everyone knows. But like one of the hallmarks of American craft, you know, whiskey production is you ask just about any American single malt producer, we will tell you what yeast strains we're using. We'll tell you what grains. We'll tell you our entire process. You want to copy us? Go ahead. It's, you know, it's just not that interesting to copy someone else. It's not, you know, that's not going to serve you well to try to make Westward. It might help you to know what we do, to give you ideas, and that's good for all of us. It's good for all of the American single malt whiskey producers that American single malt is good, that people get used to the idea that they're good products. And so we have a mutual interest in making sure that everyone is doing a good job, because if you get burned, if you go to the store and buy some new American single malt and it's terrible, then you're less likely to buy others. And so
sure.
It's very collegial. We have conventions, we talk. And we really don't have a lot of secrets.
One of the things that I've said is this, in my opinion, is one of the best industries, not American single malt necessarily, but the whiskey industry. it's a family.
Yeah.
It's not cutthroat. Netflix is trying to get rid of Disney Channel or whatever. It's you guys help each other. You guys have a tragedy. You're out there helping the folks who had the tragedy so they can stay in business.
Yep.
And, it's such a wonderful industry. I'm honored to be loosely affiliated with it. But I have so much respect for the people in this because they're all good people. They really are. And you guys are interested in this brotherhood, this collegiate relationships with each other. And that's just not something that you see in many other industries.
Yeah. Well, that's great feedback. Yeah. I think that we all understand that, sort of the rising tide lifts all boats. Is that what Nixon said back in but it's true.
He also said, I'm not a criminal.
I'm not a crook. He had a sense of humor. You got to give him that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of the other things that I like about American Single Malt is there's no BS backstory of, we were cleaning out the attic and behind this old cabinet, I found my grandpappy's recipe,
whatever. Yeah.
Because American Single Malt's not been around that long.
Right. 26 years or whatever.
Yeah. So it's to me that there's a lot of genuineness to this particular category.
Although we really did, like the first time we did a whiskey finished in a stout cask, we did kind of just forget about the barrel, and literally like a year later we were like, what's that? Yeah, we should try that.
I actually know a lot of distillers who do the same thing. They run their little experiments and they don't even remember about them.
Well, because a lot of 3-4 years later, you're busy trying to figure out something new right then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got a pandemic.
Can we do this in some sort of oak? Yeah. I think we still have that. Let's go try it.
Yeah, hopefully you wrote down what you did, It's a good reason to take notes.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been thank you both. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. This has been wonderful. I have never had anything from Westland before, and I am thrilled to have been exposed to it.
Yeah.